Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, this is the February 1st meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. Welcome, everybody. We have a quorum by the skin of our teeth. Calling the meeting to order at 7:05. Item 1 is to review the agenda for addition, removal, or adjustment of any items. Would like to split public comment, to have a public comment at the beginning of the meeting underneath item 2, be the first issue, that item we take up underneath administrative matters, or actually the second. We'd approve the minutes and then take up a public comment section. Is there any other discussion as to modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll proceed. Item 2, approval of minutes from 1/4/2021. Entertain a motion to approve. Rob? Ms. Melissa seconds. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. We'll insert the public comment period here. Anybody have any public comment before the meeting starts?
Did you want Tom to jump on now?
Yeah, so Tom, if you want to jump on down.
Oops, you're muted, Tom. You're muted, Tom. Hold up. Tom, there you go.
I've unmuted.
There we go.
Nice to see some of you and meet some of you. I did have the pleasure of serving on this board for about 8 years, back about 6 years ago, and they're back. So I very much appreciate all that you do for the community, having been there, serving in the same spot. The reason I'm asked to speak to the board was my wife and I, Carol and I, own a number of properties in Bristol, one of them being the Dunshee block, which is the large building, Romanesque building right in the middle of town, that is principally occupied now by Bristol Suites and also has 2 stores in it, Vermont Marketplace and Kimball offices. It is essentially an inn, most of it is anyway. We at one point started turning apartments over into guest rooms, and then came before the zoning board of adjustment, which existed at that time under prior zoning, just to clarify things, but there really was no zoning per se for what we were at that time. In any event, over time, since 2012, we've evolved from originally just 1 guest room now to 7. We, in the early years, were quite frankly not all that terribly successful, became quite a bit more successful over the years, and now, believe it or not, in this time of COVID, are really quite busy. We think we do about 7,000 room nights a year, so it's a lot of people coming through, and we've really been able to service the community quite well. An awful lot of people who come are folks that are visiting, but a lot of times they're out-of-town relatives of those of us who live here, a lot of times for occasions like happy ones like weddings, not so happy ones like funerals and so forth. In any event, the reason I'm here is when the new zoning was written a few years ago, you created a couple different categories for lodging. One is a hotel, which under your code provides for more than 12 rooms. Another one is a bed and breakfast, which provides for less than 6 rooms and breakfast in there. And then you have one called an inn or guest facility. An inn or guest facility, in the definition, it says that it contains a dwelling unit for the owner or a resident manager and up to 12 rooms. In the VB zone, which is the downtown zone, as you all know, an indoor guest facility is permitted as a use. A hotel is a conditional use, but an indoor guest facility is a permitted use. The reason I'm coming before you is there is an aspect of that that we never thought was a good idea and probably should have brought up a while ago. And that is the requirement that an inn or guest facility have an owner living on site. It's really not necessary. Carol and I have lived in the building over the years, but in the more recent years, over the last couple of years, we're there less and less. We actually have a place out on the lake as well. And realistically, as we do, none of our kids seems to want the building. While we're trying to grow this business, at some point in time, we might want to sell it. In fact, we probably will sell it and hope it can continue to be an important part of the Bristol scene. But would like to have you consider changing that requirement so that so it's not required that there be a resident manager or owner living in the building. I can speak further to that, but that's basically what the issue is that I wanted to discuss with the board. That's clearly, obviously, within your jurisdiction, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. We are in the very initial stages. We've just received a grant for housing study in the village planning area, which is pretty much the village plus a little bit of down on Plank Road, a few surrounding areas such as that. That work will go on probably at least for the next year, quite possibly for 2 years. The grant is a 2-year activity. Through that process, obviously, we'll be looking at housing in the village and how to maximize housing, both from different demographics as well as affordability. Within the scope of work for that activity that we, as a planning commission, have developed, one of the aspects is to review things such as this that people talk to Chris, or for that matter the select board, about the reasonableness of the regulations and how they get caught up into them every once in a while. So the effort will be to simplify the regulations. That means there's be a whole lot of debate, and I don't even want to lead that we're going to approve this, but we will include it within that discussion. Like I said, also it's a 1 to 2 year activity that we're looking at, so it won't be an immediate discussion or resolution. But I think it's fair to say that we could integrate that, as well as some of the other aspects that we're about to endeavor on, looking specifically at housing and the health of the village.
Well, I had read that you were endeavoring to begin that study and we're hoping to get the grant. And so I would encourage you to include this among the list of things that be discussed. We're not in any particular hurry here, but we do believe that it's a mistake that was made, quite frankly, when it was put in there. But quite frankly, didn't speak up then, but want to speak up now. And as long as the board understands the concern and puts it on the list, then we're well satisfied. I would like to be, when the time comes, and I'll try to pay attention, but when the time comes that it is discussed, as the only owner of any type of lodging facility in the community of Bristol, would certainly like to be be able to address it at that time.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments.
Okay, good, thank you.
Jimmy Quaglino, do you have any comments, or are you just hanging out watching?
I have one question. When a business decides to locate in town, who has jurisdiction over whether that business conforms with zoning, et cetera?
It starts with me, Jim, as the zoning administrator. And if it's not a by right use, or if they don't agree with my ruling, it then goes on to the development review board. They then make a ruling, and if somebody isn't happy with that ruling, they then move it up to the environmental court process.
the reason I asked, Chris, is there's a petition that was circulated to have licensing for a marijuana dispensing store in town. And I hope people realize that it's against federal law to begin with. And I was wondering if it goes on the ballot and people voted in, is there any recourse by the select board or the zoning commission to stop the that type of use?
Not specifically as that use. I've been spending a lot of time reading the statute on this recently. What it would allow for, if it does pass, is it's treated as any other retail, as though it would be on Main Street. What would happen would be, if it would be a change, if it was a change of use, they would have to apply for a permit. That permit then, if issued, there's a 15-day appeal period that anyone can appeal my decision. That's when you see those posters with the P on them in windows or on the end of roadways. During that 15 days, the public has the right to appeal the decision. That appeal then goes to the Development Review Board. They hear the case, they make a ruling, and the process goes there. Like I said, the next step would be if interested parties don't agree with that outcome, they then could move it along to the environmental court. So there is a mechanism. It's not a great one, but there are mechanisms there. It means you sort of have to be on your toes watching and what's going on around us. But that's the way the process works right now, currently.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So the town of Middlebury just recently voted on whether to have a marijuana dispensary in town, I believe. And I thought that the state law said that towns could decide for themselves whether or not to approve such a thing. Am I reading that?
That is correct. And that's what Jim's talking about. So on town meeting day, on the ballot, there's the question, will they opt into allowing retail marijuana sales in the town of Bristol? If it's voted yes, then Mr. Quaglino's concerns become what he's talking about, where he has concerns whether it should be allowed. At that point, if a permit was issued, then we'd go through the process. If it's turned down at town meeting day, it's a done deal for now.
I got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is a discussion of the zoning administrator's report. Do you have anything?
I got nothing. I was going to talk about Tom Wells stuff, but Tom showed up, so I didn't have to tonight. So we're good.
Okay. So the next item is miscellaneous correspondence. Few things going on that may be of interest. The Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee had their initial meeting on 1/27 and organized. I've been in contact with the chair, which I can't remember his name off the top of my head, to express interest that we would like to, as a board, be on the copy list for their minutes so that we can kind of follow along with what they're doing. There was a community wastewater solutions virtual presentation that regional planning put on the 26th. It was hosted very well by, again, I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry, I apologize. And it focused a lot on some things that are going on over in the valley and how Waitsfield, primarily to some degree, Warren has set up funds to support wastewater improvements for businesses, not necessarily private residences, and how that all works, both from a financial point of view for the town as well as individual. There seems to be no magic here. There was a lot of discussion about pre-treatment as well as in-ground injection, which is typical of most places in Vermont outside of the big cities. There was some discussion about basically a homeowner's agreement or an owner's agreement among common septic participants, if you will, that'd be similar to an HOA, but it would be basically just for the septic system. I didn't really come away with anything that was like gee whiz information for us as we walk down our path for the housing that we are going to be going on. That webinar is on the Regional Planning Commission website if you're interested in following up with it. There's a grant opportunity through AARP. It's a short period of applications between now and March 22nd with a completion date of the activity by November 30th. I just toss that out there as let people be aware of that. I don't know if anybody's got a burning issue to pursue another grant or not. I'm not proposing to. And I think that kind of concludes some of the intermediate activity. Somebody got any questions on that discussion? No? Good. Well, we'll move on then. The next item is under item 3 is continuing business of the bylaw grant activity. We received official confirmation of our award, and I sent that email around with the preparation checklist. It has a list of requirements that became a whole lot more clear than through the grant process, although I think we were walking in step. Yeah, where those bullets are, Chris, that's great. Although I think we were walking in step with pretty much most of them, and certainly we're aware of some of the others. I personally found a discrepancy between these quote unquote requirements and some of the baby steps that, excuse me, baby steps in progress aspects that the grant sort of alluded to. But nonetheless, here they are. And I think some of them are advisory, well, not advisory, some of them are just information as to strategies and whatnot, as far as the first few bullets are, and some of them are things that we need to do when you get down towards the 2/3 and the last letter part of it. Excuse me. I did incorporate these with the draft RFP that we're going to talk about next. So I don't know if anybody, anything here just really jumps out at anybody, or else we'll be looking at this again in a few minutes when we look at the draft RFP. Well, crickets.
Nope.
All I hear is crickets. So let's move on to the draft RFP.
Well, you can, Kevin, I was just going to say, it's a pretty inclusive list of stuff. So
It is.
for a very small grant, it's got a lot of requirements, some of which are easy, like avoid floodplain areas, some of which are much more complicated, but I don't see any problem with any of them.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize there were going to be quite this many parameters to follow.
Yeah, I concur with that. I think the one that popped out with me, and we probably can work on it, is including parking waivers, and we sort of informally do some of that downtown. So,
Well, there's actually, when we redid the parking standards last time, there's actually verbiage in our current regs that addresses people having the ability to use on-street parking to count towards their parking requirements, the ability for, like if a business has multiple shifts, that you don't have to count, because it's based on number of employees, but you actually can break it out by employees per shift.
yeah.
So we have some of that in place, that I think reviewing it and whether tweaking it or just come straight out and state, these are the provisions that are currently in our regulations, and we feel that they meet the needs of our community.
Good. So I wasn't totally in sync with all that, but that's good. Any other comments or questions about these bullets? Okay, so then the next thing to do is move along to the draft RFP, I guess.
Which one's that?
Scope of work, I think it's called.
Yep.
Yeah. So a little bit of bringing a few things out of the closet here. When we were putting the grant together, I sort of walked down a path to get some pricing to support the grant, and Chris, and that prompted Valerie to make some comments. So Chris and Valerie and I sat down and discussed how to procure, not only from the state's point of view within this grant, the requirements they have there, but within the requirements of the town or the desires of the town on how we should be procuring services. So Valerie had just finished up a RFP for engineering services for some sidewalk work over in Munsell. So she graciously gave me that, and I pretty much modeled this document after that layout that she had. The document's set up to focus because it's engineering service, to focus on performance and experience, which as we scroll down through, we'll see and hopefully discuss a little bit. It starts out with a background, which I basically dropped in the goals and policies right out of the town plan. So I don't imagine there's a whole lot of discussion there. It just lists out and familiarizes a prospective consultant as to what we've written in our town plan. The next thing is to come into the discussion about the grant, and then all of those bulleted requirements that we just discussed are in there verbatim as to the background requirement for the state for the grant. And then the scope of work, it should look familiar, because this is what, for the most part, we developed way back when we were working on the grant for what we were thinking we wanted for engineering services or consulting services. So this should be very familiar with everybody. It did tailor it a little bit based on the change in scope that the state suggested we consider in light of the fact that they didn't fully fund the grant. And then specific to Tom's discussion tonight, 2.3 really talks about some of those things that are out there that different individuals bring up that we need to consider as we walk down this larger path, if you will. Scrolling down, again, it goes down through with the different aspects that we think we want to look at. And then there's a task section, which probably we should slow down a little bit and look at. There, in support of the scope of work, there's some specific things that we probably should be thinking about and considering. In this section, obviously, we probably should get a kickoff meeting to get everybody on the same page. I anticipate, I'm suggesting underneath 3.2 that we have some sort of a training from whoever the successful consultant is to kind of consolidate and get us reminded up to speed for the background information that's within the state requirements. And then that would be its own specific meeting, I think, and maybe, we maybe want a couple hours or a few hours to really dig into that and understand that as we start our work. Then there's 3.3 talks about actual working with the planning commission. Some of the stuff that's in yellow, I'm looking for comment from Kristen and or Valerie on. I'm sorry, I can't see it.
That's okay.
Get down there. So 3.4 talks about how we will conduct our meetings. I'm thinking, or I'm suggesting that as opposed to how we worked on a plan where we had regional planning at every meeting and we discussed things and then chewed on them and they came back, we may want to consider having the consultant come in, work with us on a meeting, and then give us some homework, if you will, to discuss a meeting or two, so that we wouldn't have sequential meetings and there would be some things that we would work on and discuss on our own. And my intent there is to economize the consultant's time a little bit if we can, and we think that's doable. I also mentioned that, we're doing hybrid meetings. It's possible the consultant that we entertained could not be in town or the next town over. We may be paying them an hour windshield time or something like that if we require them to attend every single meeting. So I left it that we have 2 meetings somewhere along the line that would be in person, but they certainly would have the option to Zoom in on meetings. Is there any thoughts or comments on 3.4 and 3.5 or 3.4? Sounds good.
Yeah,
I think it's fine.
Okay, 3.5 talks about master documents. Ideally, this consultant should be coordinator on master documents. I believe we can give them an editable copy of our current Unified Development Regs. And then they should maintain a red line as well as a finished document, so that as we go through the process, we or any interested party can see what we're changing through the process and make it really apparent there. So that, any questions about 3.5 or comments? Okay, 3.6 has to do with timing of the project. I left this pretty vague. Only brought in the term of the grant, which is starting today and goes through January 31st of 2024. And we've got we've got an internship, and we've talked about maybe more internships that would be nested within this, depending on how the things go. So I think that's pretty open-minded and open-ended, I guess it is. And we have some flexibility over that time period, I believe. 3.7 is deliverables or production. So we'd look to end up with a master document, and that would eventually become the document that we would put out to voter consideration. And then we would keep a permanent red line as well as a PDF document or something that's convertible to PDF. We'd also be looking for the consultant to write the report for grant closure. There is a requirement that we let the state know what we've done and how we've complied with all the requirements that were in that previous section. So any questions or comments there?
so the only comment I have is on the timing. Once you have your kickoff meeting and you have a consultant finalized, maybe asking them to try to put together a timeline so that you have some goals and milestones so we know how we're doing. So I'd hate for it to be October of 24, and also we're like, oh God, we got all this to get done.
Right. So when you go down into their proposal requirements, there is a discussion about schedule.
Oh, awesome.
So that would be tentative, but it would give you a good idea of how they think that would play out. So item 4 is pretty much when we would go out to bid, when we would have proposals due, and thinking everything was honky-dory, we'd have the select board turn around and award soon after that. 5 deliverables, we sort of talked about that a little bit, that we want information in an editable format. Any sort of databases work essentially will be transferred to the town. Any GIS data that is produced would fold into the planning commission, at regional planning commission requirements. I think that is, any questions with those two sections? Submission requirements.
Kevin,
Yeah,
I do have a question, and this is more to project timeline, and I'm just getting a little mixed up here and just wanted clarification. On the completion date of January 31st, 24, is that just when funds run out for the grant, or is that a deadline that something needs to be passed by the
I
town?
don't know. I don't know. I need to pulse. I'm tending to pulse Jenny Lavoy, because here's what where I'm thinking about that very same question is, in order for us to fold in with a regularly scheduled polling operation would be March of 2021, 23. And then that's like, what's that, like 9-10 months before the end of this thing is done. So I think it needs clarification with the contract, the grant administrators. We certainly could have this thing done and ready for voters to approve for March meeting of 2024.
Yeah, at least propose to the voters.
Yeah, propose to the voters, which to me makes sense. I'm not so sure if I understand the cost to hold a special election, it might be more than it would be if we forfeit the 10% of the grant. So there's that little issue too. But yeah, you're right on, Rob, that it's not, it doesn't line in with any sort of voter approval, normal voter approval sequence.
Yeah, Kevin,
Yeah,
I also had a thought, and it goes along somewhat with what Chris was saying, that we probably would want to set a date for the study to be completed that's earlier than the last date of the grant, the last day of the grant, because that seems pushing things right out to the end. And we might want to set some internal milestones, draft due by such and such a date, final copy by final version by such and such a date. But I wanted to go back for a second and say, this is an amazing amount of work you've done, Kevin, and I really appreciate it. I was stunned to see how complicated this was, especially since the state told us we didn't have to do it, but we're doing it anyway. So thank you for doing this. But I did think that maybe we want to think about those dates.
yep. So I can move that date back a little bit. I would personally, and this is certainly open for discussion, but I personally would look for the proposal from the bidders or the consultants to lay out a schedule for some of those intermediate dates. But I think you're right. If we, pull that date back a couple weeks or something, so that we're not rubbing right up to the end of it. Probably is wise.
You could almost pull it to January 1 that would give us 30 days to
Figure out
breathing
if
room.
Figure out if we're in big trouble or just a little trouble.
Yeah.
Good point. So for submission requirements, and there are actually two submissions. One is a technical, and then the other is a cost, and they're separate deliberately so that the technical information can be evaluated independent of cost. So 6.1 lays out the technical proposal requirements, qualifications, scope of work, and then within that scope of work is where I'm thinking they talk about their tasks, timeline, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Proposed schedule, resumes of key staff, references. Interestingly enough, I just kept this line in there, the proposal shouldn't exceed 20 pages. So that, I think with that in mind, we can start looking at capacity, and you can start looking at capacity of the people that are proposing to do the work, and their ability to lay it out in such a manner to accomplish it. And that's why I'm sort of thinking, unless somebody has a strong opinion of it, that all these intermediate goals, and once we start going, we can get a sense of that anyway. Does anybody have any comments or desires on the technical proposal part? Okay. Cost proposal. So just lay out what the costs are by hours, that sort of thing, pretty standard. Consultant selection, 7.1. So I've sort of said that the planning commission, as well as zoning administrator and the town administrator, which would be Valerie, would evaluate these proposals. They're broken down into 5 categories. Understanding of the project, qualifications of personnel, clarity of the proposal, understanding of the ability to meet schedule, and demonstrated knowledge of the smart growth areas concept. So, and then there's some weights to them. Anybody,
Yeah, on the smart growth areas, is that a term that's been developed to cover certain things?
yeah, if you go back to the list of things that the state is requiring, which is in 1.3, 1.2. They talk about increasing house choice, portability, and opportunity in smart growth areas, and then 1.2, 3.4 are really subsets of that whole concept of what they can term as smart growth areas.
And what number?
1.2, it's on page 3. So it's really starts. Yeah, right there. So then it's that's, to me, that's kind of an introduction, because it encompasses .2, .3, and .4 really when you get right down to it. So their understanding of those guiding documents and the concept that the state has laid out within the grant is what that particular evaluation point would be.
I didn't know if they had something defined or whether they just thought it was a good idea. So it's smart. But it's just written out
Yeah,
regularly. So
in my mind, it encompasses those first four items.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just doing a quick search here, and it seems there's a statutory definition of it in
Oh,
Vermont.
no.
Act 183. I'm looking in the Vermont Law Review. So anyway, I think there's some, I think it's written down someplace, it appears.
So are we comfortable using that term then?
I think we have to, don't we? It's in the grant award.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the verbiage that they used in the grant. So I would be fine with that. It's a fairly common term that's used. It's not a new term. They've been using it for a while. We as a group may want to hone in on what that means before you do your actual evaluation, sort of come up with a subset of criteria, what that means, so you can evaluate it fairly.
Okay. It does say the basis of the bylaw modification agreement, which goes back up to the top.
Yeah,
Should we refer to that section?
I would. I think you're fine here.
Are you happy, Lloyd?
Yeah, I kind of thought it might be that way, but I didn't.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? Adding that, like if you did, in like in parentheses after the modernization grants, do put the C section 1.2.
Anybody else happy?
So my only concern with it is you got a lot of people involved.
For the selection?
Yeah, so I'm fine with it, but you got a fairly tight window to get it done. So is the RFPs will show up, they'll be open, then they'll be disseminated out to the group. It's gonna be tight from when they get it to when we need their feedback. I don't know if you're gonna have a meeting in between there or not.
So, yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking it would be an open meeting discussion, or would it be? Would it be executive session?
It might be executive because you are talking about contract.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be a meeting, though. It shouldn't be.
You could do a subcommittee, which they would have to keep meeting minutes. That'd be about the extent of it. Which the meeting minutes may be, these people met, they've gone to an executive session, and then at the end, they come out and they give whatever their recommendation is. But full board or subcommittee, that's the only thing I'm just thinking time frame, trying to wedge it in there.
I agree, but I also wanted to have everybody have a chance to weigh in on it as well.
What was the time frame? Yeah, because you don't give enough time. Actually, I'm looking at your dates.
There's no meeting without a special meeting in 2 weeks, which isn't enough time to do anything.
Right. The only other option would be to push this March date out to the select board's next meeting, and that would allow you to have your regular scheduled meeting between there.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah,
Because I think everyone's feedback is very important on it. I just want to make sure that we have time to get all that feedback in there. And you could, and then it can also be a discussion. I mean, there's points of this where.
Actually, our regular meeting would be the first, the week before that.
Before the 8th, yeah.
March 1st is our next regular meeting. I was wrong, so.
But that's still, I think, to Chris's point, it'd be good to give the select board some wiggle room and go to their next meeting, even if we met our regular meetings on the 1st.
Yeah, yeah. Because we could get you could almost present the findings to the select board by the 8th, because we should have that following your first meeting. And then put their next meeting as their selected by whatever the next meeting would fall in there, 22nd or whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay, so if everybody's in agreement, I'll move that date then.
We are section 7, right?
Section 7, yeah. So 7374 is a bunch of boilerplate. I think 8, go on to section 8, a lot of that's boilerplate too, unless somebody loves that kind of stuff. Insurance, payments, and then section 9 is clarifications and proposal due dates. So that was quick through 8 and 9. Has anybody got any burning desires to talk more about it?
Do we, I missed it. Is there talk of the format this needs to? Okay, right there, never mind. Perfect. So I want to make sure that we were asking for electric and paper copies of it. Which we did, never mind. You asked for it in 6, right at the beginning of 6, separate technical costs shall be submitted in sealed envelopes and/or, I would just do and a separate PDF document. Get rid of the or. Then you have an actual unsealing of the bids process, just to confirm the bids are here and who qualified.
Say that again.
So once they come in, that day that they're due, either the following day or whenever they're postmarked, because they'll be stamped by the front desk here. Then you have an opening of the bids just to confirm that who you have and that they qualify. It's just a standard bid opening.
And that Valerie does all that.
You can, yeah.
So
I just had a question, just in general. I mean, it doesn't for any of this, but how are the bids solicited? You just put this out to all the consulting firms, or how's that? Is it posted?
So Valerie has a bid service. It's primarily for construction contracts. When I was talking to the state, to Jake Emmerich, they have a similar thing that's designed more for consulting services. And he offered to put it out on that thing. So it'll probably go out on, I'm anticipating it'll go out on some sort of electronic bulletin board for solicitation, as opposed to specific invitations. Unless we got people we really want to have a look at it.
I mean, no, I think that's the best way, because then it's sort of equal, even playing field. You go, if you're in that field, you should be checking that every day, just like you're searching for a job.
Sure.
Looking for business. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah. Kevin, I have a question. It's
Sure.
not specifically about, I think you did a great job, as I said. When I look at this, what we're asking people to do, and then I think we're talking about $10,000. Is that really a realistic amount to get this type of work? I have no idea. That's why I'm asking the question. And, you know, they cut us back to a partial grant.
It is a lot of work to get some money. The other thing is, I'm not convinced we'll get $10,000 proposals either. I
Oh,
think
right.
that we've sort of talked about that we have money in the budget for planning purposes this fiscal year and next fiscal year, which starts in July. And there's pros and cons to putting what our dollar amount is in there of our grant, although it's public information and they could probably figure out how to get that a whole lot quicker than I can. Anyway, but based on what we're asking for, I wouldn't assume this is a $10,000 package.
No, but if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is we would have the option to top that up if we wanted to, within a certain amount.
I don't see why not.
Yeah, I mean, just ballparking, you've probably got about easily available to you $3,000 to $4,000 a fiscal year. So you got another $6,000 to $8,000 you could throw at this if we had to.
When we had talked about this before, we cut stuff out, but we really didn't. You know, when Chris and Valerie and I were talking about, we were thinking around 15,000.
Yeah.
So and one little feedback I got from Poaching prospective consultants, was a very similar discussion. So having said all that, put it on public. That's there. So, yeah, it's a lot of work, but I don't know. Also, these people are used to doing this stuff, so some of this stuff might be boilerplate for them too, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens, obviously.
I just had a
Melissa.
general question. Yeah, because I'm not familiar with, I know what the bid process is, but I'm not familiar with being involved with it. So if anyone who makes a bid, if they make the qualifications, the requirements that we have, it just automatically goes to the lowest bid?
No.
Or is that how it works, or is it who we feel would be the best fit?
It's the
Both.
way we've got this set up is who we feel would be the best fit. Now, having said that, if there is a huge cost disparity, and number 2 is almost as good, but half the money or something like that, well, maybe dollars do come, but the first cut would be an evaluation of the performance, or evaluation of the qualifications, if you will.
Mhm.
Rob, I don't want to put you on a spot, but as far as pricing work and chasing work from a consultant point of view, is there anything here really out of line for what you experienced with your firm?
So to be honest, I don't have much to do with that aspect of the work, fortunately for me. But it doesn't seem too far out of line with what I have kind of seen from the outside. So.
Having just gone through this to buy a fire truck, I think you're pretty close to online. We sent them a set of parameters, and then we went through and we scored all the parameters, and then those that made that cut, we then evaluated things like reputation, references, and then went to the dollars. And then it was also, at that point, we worked on negotiating the contract one way or the other. Just because somebody comes in at 14 doesn't necessarily mean that that's where they are. I mean, like when we bought the truck, it was, okay, we want this and this. You included these 3 things in your, we don't want those we don't want that. So we were able to do that some. So I think this feels, I like how this feels, because you've got a good method of reviewing who each of the bids, equal playing fields. It's not just a gut. It's not like we aren't comparing like who had the jazziest looking resume or that. There's some meat potatoes behind what we're looking for.
Okay.
I know that sometimes funding requires that you go with a certain, low bid or something like that. But if it's not a requirement of the funding agency or anything like that, then, not locked into low bidder only.
Yeah, I'll have to revisit the language from the state point of view, but this,
I don't remember seeing it, but
I think underneath $10,000, you go out and get a couple informal prices and figure out what your best value is.
Right.
I think that's my recollection, but we should be sure of
Yeah,
that. And then this format is right from how the town does their proposals, so that should inherently be okay from the town point of view. Okay, any final comments or thoughts? Okay, so I'll make those changes, and then I'll get with Valerie and see how to get it out on the streets. So moving on to the next item is UVM intern and scope of work. I did send out.
Which one is that, Kevin?
So that would be. So, local democracy orientation.
Okay, that's what you want.
So this slide deck was sent out and is included in the prep package. And it kind of goes through the initiation process, or the orientation, so we can kind of understand where we're going to be going with our intern. Shannon has already signed up to kind of foster them, particularly on the physical character survey. One interesting thing I saw in here that the group that's working on the surveys might want to consider is they talked about having a little side project, if you will, for I guess you could call it downtime, or where they're really not up, I don't say up to see, but these aren't getting coordinated with stuff to do. I'm wondering if it's kind of something to keep tucked in the back of our head, is if that happens through this process with our intern, that they develop a little video or something of the process of town planning through our identification of goals and procedures, and onto our quest for grants and award on, and then from there go on to what the plan is for the grant, and how that is intended to be accomplished. I think, and I bring that up for a couple reasons, is that it could be a great learning tool for the intern to really work through that whole process and understand it, because this is quite honestly for them to understand local government a little bit better. And if it's done well, it could be a great thing to pop around so people can understand, as a communication tool, if you will, what we're up to and where how we're working through this grant activity. So I think that's something that the group who by default is Jeff tonight, may want to consider as a filler, if you will, as that process goes along. Is there any thoughts or comments about that?
So it seems like it would be a good idea for them to do that. It would be quite a learning thing, and it might give us something useful for new people coming in to look
I
at.
think it's a nice idea. I don't know how much time the student will have. They said 6 hours a week they would devote to this,
Right.
but
right.
maybe that'll work out fine. Let's see how it
Oh,
goes.
yeah. Yep. And yeah, and I want to we will want to maximize the use of the particular student. And kids that age, but a student that age is a whiz with video and all that kind of stuff. So what I have in my mind is a 6-week project. They'll probably do in 2 days, But yeah, so I understand there's some limitations there, but I think it's a great thing to tuck in the back of our mind as to the progression of that particular person or particular effort. The next item is a physical character survey update, and I had made up a map, which I just barely sent out before the meeting to everybody, that included the space. You can see them, the spaces.
Share it real quick. Okay, now we're there. Sorry.
So this is blocked into the spaces where the density, was it the 2007 density study, whatever it was called, covered in the village. and to block them out. My intent was to block them out so that, at least in my mind, I can visually see what part of the village was covered with that survey that we pretty much agreed to use as a base and then update that. There was also some discussion about looking at other areas. So I think I'd like to have that discussion if we think we need those other areas and nail them down so that once the coordination starts with an intern, they can be formulating and collecting those additional areas as well as the update of the 2007 survey. So just we'll put that out for discussion.
So the two things that when I was looking at this survey originally, I felt were missing. One is we've got a very large mobile home park in our village.
Yeah.
And having that data, or at least the survey of that infrastructure may be helpful. And the other piece was, it doesn't really look at any of the periphery growth in our community. I look at, as you head a little bit north on North Street and up Mount Street, you've got like the Meadow Lane, Devon Lane area. That's sort of the last edge of the village. So just sort of seeing what the growth patterns are as you expand out of the village and see what we have there as well. Is that inside of the village, we know what that is. We're fairly comfortable with that, but just seeing, so it's not just what we have today, but it's also so we can see what we may have in the future. That's my only two pieces of input on the study earlier.
Any comments?
So I was thinking that first, we should, of course, do the area that was done before, because that's the only way we can have a straight one-to-one comparison, right? That's part of it. And then we could see how have housing uses changed in these specific areas, and we'll have definitive data on that. Whether we'll find anything useful, we don't know. I agree with Chris about adding some other areas, but I'm not sure how to pick them.
The other part that they didn't touch on was actually the Main Street area, which is unique to me because there's a lot of housing in that area. That's along Main Street and down South Street. There's a lot of rental property in that area and along West Street that most of what's in that black, a lot of it is single family or multifamily homes, but it's predominantly single family. So I just had to look at the blocks. I was like, I thought Main Street was in it. Bad, me, for just assuming.
Can you turn that?
Hang on. You're asking a lot of me here.
Yeah,
How's that?
cool. So I'm hearing, I think I'd like to hone in on areas definitely so that as Shannon starts coordinating with this person, which is imminent, we have a definitive list. So let's kind of talk about it a little bit. Do you have any comments, Rob?
No, it's no.
Wait, is it just not feasible to actually do the entire town? Is that why it's not done? Because it would take too long?
Well, I think there is that aspect. And the other aspect is, what do we want to get out of this survey? We're about to walk down a path where a lot of the discussion from the grant point of view, has to do with setbacks, parking, usage, that type of thing. So if we look at other areas, we would want to supplement or augment those types of, to get those types of information. I would think, I don't know, that's certainly open for discussion as well, but given how much do we have to do before there's a diminishing return as well,
Right. Because, I mean, I look at the boxes that are blacked out. There's a lot of very similar housing in that area. It's sort of like the center of the village. It's a lot of single family homes in there. And I just think, I agree with Kevin, that needs to be part of it so you can compare apples to apples. But for future planning, knowing what's going on, again, in the Main Street, West Street area where there's a lot of rental. You had up north here, this is sort of North Street and Plank Road area. We're seeing more growth right through there.
Right.
And it's a little more rural growth feel, but that is when we put together the original town plan, that was sort of the next growth area. And has it started to become achieved, and what can be done to try to promote that even more?
Well, should we have an aim to include it where there are apartments that we know, like over on Lovers Lane, or further up on North Street?
Yeah, say up on the end of Mountain Street on Devon Lane, you've got two large apartments and one small apartment.
So is Lovers Lane in the village planning area? No, so Lovers Lane.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, because with Hewitt Road's the southern tier of it. So
Yeah, because the
I mean, I
grant.
think
Go
it
ahead.
would be vital to know how many apartments there are, how many people are living in apartments within the village, and what's available now.
So I guess let me not interject.
yeah, so this particular survey is on character, and so it's sort of the
Okay.
field density. I agree with you, Melissa. Uses are imperative as well, and that's sort of where I got hung up for a minute. But I guess it's what area do you want to look at so that you can sort of mold your next round of growth around, I guess would be, and what are the
Okay.
pros and cons of those areas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I think we should remember is that this is just one tiny portion of this. It's a student who's going to work 6 hours a week,
Right.
maybe.
Right.
And I presume that some of that information you're asking about, like where their apartments and who's living there, that would be done by the consultant, would tell us.
I think that's
Oh,
all census.
okay.
That's a lot of that census-based data.
Right. Right.
So I agree, all this stuff would be great to know, but I think we have to go step by step with the student and see what the capacity is. I teach college students. One thing I know is they're often, they undertake a lot of things all at the same time, and their capacity can be severely stressed. And if you try and put a big load on right at the beginning, they may
Right.
just not be able to do it.
Well, we have time too. It's not,
Yeah. But I mean, we could start with one part, but my thought was we do this, right, that this is a step-by-step process, that we start with one part and then see what we can add on as it goes along. But we might be able to pick one or two areas in additional to small areas to do additionally right now.
I mean,
definitely want to do Main Street and Main and West and right in there. I mean, South.
So Jeff, following your sort of progression concept, it might be having them do the first 4 blocks that are on this map in a time frame, and is that, I'd hate to overburden them, say, hey, we're gonna do these 4, plus we're gonna add 2 more. And at the end, we only get 2, because that's all that they could really do.
Yeah,
Have them start with this as primary, come up with 2 secondary, so they know that they're out there, but the primary focus is we gotta get these 4 done. And the sooner you get those 4 done, the sooner we can move on to the next step.
or,
Sort of a-
I mean, we have another option. I'm thinking out loud now, which is we could say, let's start with doing 2 of these 4 areas and add 2 new areas.
That's what I was gonna say was, do we need to do this entire area, or is, one street, just West Pleasant or something like that, enough of a data set out of this original one as a comparison?
Yeah, we're not constrained by the previous survey. So maybe we pick 2 of these
That's true.
areas.
Yeah, I mean, I know, just looking at my street alone, since this survey has been done, absolutely no change has occurred.
Well, that's useful data.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what I was gonna
I went through it. I was like, hey, that's exactly what it was when they did the survey.
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, should we focus on the places we know have changed or currently changing?
I like the idea of staying along, so Pleasant Street's one of the most densely populated areas. It's got a fairly deep mix. Because if you think about it actually you start at Spring, and if you ran Spring almost down to Pleasant, those 2 blocks that are on here, on the 2 lower blocks, that's a pretty good demographic through there, don't you think? For baseline of what the village has. Other than Spring's got a lot of rental stuff that's been converted to rentals as well.
So I'm not hung up on uses. I'm looking at physical attributes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you could pick any one of those 4 would be reasonably representative of the other. And if you wanted to look at change in use, that's relatively easy. And I don't think there's a whole lot of change in physical dimensions in any of that either, if any,
very little.
Lloyd, what do you have any thoughts?
I don't know if we want to spread it out too far, and lose our concentration. But all these things are interesting. But I don't know, seems like more than half our time is getting it started, and the actual study period isn't that long.
How about you, Bill? Bill?
Bill stepped away for a minute, it looks like.
Come back. So I guess the discussion, if we want those secondary, if you've got time areas, we should identify them.
Would it be outlandish maybe that their very first assignment is to review the existing study?
Nope. No, and then
And have them give us what they think the time frame is that they could.
Yep.
Because again, it's hard for me to guesstimate what they're going to be able to achieve. And if they come back and say, oh yeah, I could knock all 4 of those blocks out again with 2 quick visits to the village, and they feel comfortable with that, great, we have some working room here now. But if they're like, oh God, all 4, that's an entire semester.
Yeah, okay. So we will stay with, so the direction will be, what I'm hearing is we'll stay with these 4 blocks, analyze them, and as they are working on those, we will identify what the next step is. that make
Yeah, and
sense, everybody?
And if it's taking too much time, we can modify it.
Okay.
And tell
So-
them they get an A no matter what. That'll motivate them.
So I think the other thing is, Chris, I've seen the data set before. Is it public where you've got all the, like the town, the lot maps and all the real estate activity and all that kind of stuff is something that could point them in that direction for evaluation criteria as well?
It is, I mean, we have all the lot maps. They can look, they could do research in the vault. I mean, we have actually in the list, all the listers cards have, or they had. That's just owner history. It doesn't have a lot of data there.
But I'm thinking so that there's something that, what do we have that they can look at remotely as opposed to coming down here and down to the pavement?
One of the big ones is that Vermont Interactive Maps.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that gives them a ton of it overlays the parcels on it. Granted, they're off a tiny bit, but that's trivial. And they can see, like, one of the things we talk about is in the end with this is looking at some infill opportunities and sort of the characteristics. They should be able to do a lot of that remotely.
Yeah.
And almost they're finalized doing a drive-through. Yep, I can help them find resources if they don't have them.
So Bill, we kind of did a round table on the discussion about the blocks for the study, as well as some other potential areas in the strategy. We kind of came full circle on that, but we want to just back up a little bit and give you some time for perspective on that process.
Thank you, Kevin. Are we thinking now more about the intern or about the study? And are we refining the purpose of the study?
So the interns we're talking about the intern assignment right now.
Okay,
We had talked about this 2007 density study being something that has ranged from the starting point plus something to maybe a little bit of that plus something to whether we would just have them start with that density study. And then also part of the discussion is that density study is very clear on physical features, if you will, with a little bit of usage and information in there that could likely have changed. And then how do we want to pursue physical features versus uses with the intern's time? Is that fair? Anybody shake your head, yes, no, maybe?
Fine.
So that's kind of.
that sounds reasonable to me, Kevin. I heard Jeff's point about our overburdened students who quite commonly, like all of us from time to time, imagine their capacity being greater than it actually is. I think it's important in intern study for the student to feel like he or she is doing something interesting and important and that they're learning. So from my perspective, Kevin, what I might add is simply that we should think about the student as well as ourselves and what they can experience they can get from it.
Yeah. Great.
I had a question. I'm sorry, I can't remember. We just are getting one intern or,
It will be one intern, yes.
okay.
And as the slide presentation that they sent us says, this is, for most of them, this is their first experience in dealing with local government. So it'll be a learning curve for them. And it is, after all, it's supposed to be a learning experience for them. And whatever we get out of it is plus for us. But I think we do have to keep our expectations reasonable and then just be flexible as we find out what the student can do and what the demands are.
And I very selfishly will go back to one of my previous comments, that if you take some time or have some time for them to develop some sort of a video, if you will, that's a tremendous learning opportunity for not only them, but provide us with some communication material, propaganda, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I suggest, and I'll talk to Shannon about this, that, when we first meet with the student, that we say, here's this task, just the updating the character survey, but we also have this idea about a video. And, could that fit in, and would you be interested in doing that? And see what the student, how the student responds.
Right. Exactly.
And who knows, maybe the two tasks together, they come up with something else that may be beneficial to this group as well.
Yeah. We also have no idea what skill set the student we get will have.
Exactly.
Okay. We talked about that one enough?
Yep.
Okay, so the next item will be a value character survey, which is sort of, we've talked about this a little bit, and I've deliberately separated them over the last few meetings about physical requirements and values. So, and the discussion today was some sort of survey, community input tool, what have you. And Jeff and Jacob and Shannon had stepped off to work that issue. I guess, Jeff, have you got any thoughts or directions or?
Well, as I thought about it, I did think about it and talk to Shannon and Jason about it, that, the first part, which we've just talked about, is doing the physical character survey. And then I'm a little bit at a loss on how to do the values character survey, because I looked at the one that Moncton did, and it was, what do you like about your town? And it was all very general, and all the answers were all over the place. That didn't seem to me to be of tremendous value to us, if the intern can even get to it. And I know that constructing a survey is not a simple task. So I sort of got in a quandary here as to exactly go ahead on this, partly because what is it we're trying to find out? Because we're not doing a survey just about, I don't think, what do you like about Bristol, but that something somehow relates to this grant. And what is it we want to find out, and how do we frame a survey so it doesn't predispose in one way or another or set people off in a bad direction? I'm a little over my head on this, I think. I'm not sure how to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Jeff, that garbage in, garbage out. If we ask just fluffy, what do you like, what don't you like questions, you don't get much.
Yeah.
We already can tick off the, hey, I like the fact that it's a walkable village. I mean, we already know what a lot of the bonuses are. So I agree with you. It's, to me, what you really want to get when I think about it is more the meat and potatoes of like growth, where people would like to see growth, what type of growth. Are they comfortable with the volume of homes that we have, with the volume of rental opportunities? Very, very specific questions in my mind. I don't like fluffy questions on these. It's a waste of people's time. It's a waste of our time to read it and then try to digest data out of it. And like I said, but at the same time, you don't want to get into any type of a political conundrum with it either, where, as you said, either it sets somebody in one way or the other. Surveys are challenging.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know, there might be, this may behoove us to, I hate to use it again, but hire a third party to do this part for us, or at least create the survey. We can crunch the data after the fact.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking. I've worked in my career. I've worked with a lot of surveys. I've never constructed them or done them, but from working with people who do, I know how careful they have to be. And I've, had people say, well, of course they got that answer because you asked this question. and I really don't want to do that. So I was a little bit leery of us trying to construct a survey.
Yeah, I'm actually taking a stats class right now that in data manipulation, and it's hitting on just what you said. You can feed them the questions so you get the answers you want.
Yeah.
Whether it's intentional or not. Most of the time it's unintentional. But if you all want, I can dig around some and try to find resources and get them out to you for your next meeting. And whether it's consulting, whether it's just at least maybe just some great resources for us to utilize, for you all to utilize, or for whatever, to try to go down this path correctly. I don't mind doing some of that research for you.
So let's recenter here a little bit. Or my thought as to recentering. This question came up when we started talking about changing the density, particularly in the village, in the village area, or any area in a village planning area. We were concerned, my recollection is we were concerned about losing the character and the desirability if we didn't choose our changes in physical layout, if you will, or physical requirements, or use requirements for that matter. And this was a concern that we understand pretty clearly the risk. What are the risks of changing the uses and physical parameters with what is so highly valued here in the village? So, and yeah, that's all soft stuff, and a lot of it's nebulous, but we were trying to quantify that as we walk down through this process with the grant activity, we don't lose vision of what we have here. So I guess there's, I guess we should go ahead.
Yeah, so I understand exactly what you're saying, Kevin. We want to find out, we want to get a good sense of what people would like to see. One of my concerns was that if you ask questions in a survey without context, that you will get steered in a in a certain direction. I think if you just say to people, do you think Bristol should be denser? 90% will say no. Right?
Yeah, okay.
So I'm wondering, even if maybe the way, and now I'm just thinking out loud, maybe the way to do a character survey would be to have some groups, right? Like to get together, a contact group, not a contact group, where you pull together 10 or 15 residents and say, here's what we're looking at. Give them an explanation. Here's the issues that we're dealing with. What do you think of this?
So I'd like to, with that comment that I had made about the balance, I'd like to go around and just get some input on what the thought process is and the perspective we'll get amongst people. So Bill, have you got, so given the balance that we're trying to strike there without losing or else getting predetermined knowledge or biased knowledge.
Well, it seems like we agree that it's very easy to get bias in any survey or a series of questions, often unintentional. And that's that's a major issue in all of the planning process, in my view. Because the question is, who should decide what's important as we plan the future? And some could say, well, really not. It's not just the present residents. It's what we might imagine future ones who would have to afford to live here, might have to commute, some might say the state should do the planning for us, lay out what are the ideal criteria for a place like Bristol or for the entire state. These are all contentious issues. So once you turn to a survey of values or preferences, as Jeff has said, and Chris and everybody who's spoken that I can think of right now, the risk of bias is enormous. So I think it's because surveys are so popular. I think it's fine to do one, but I hope we don't overly rely upon it as our authority, as our deciding factor. These groups that Jeff was referencing, and we've all, well, I can't think of the name for them right now myself. Focus, yes.
Group.
Yeah, we're all familiar with them, and we've been either making use of them or participating in them or learning from them for about 40 years that I know of officially. Focus groups, they've been called. And they can be helpful. They have their risks too, because they tend to be self-selecting, and people who have the time and the willingness to participate cause a bias there. But sometimes focus groups can be better than just a survey. So I guess my message is, Kevin, that over the years, it seems to me that our planning commission and the people who volunteered and the people who the select board has appointed has always managed to reach a pretty good compromises, have a pretty good balance of opinions and philosophies and views, that it's worked out pretty well. And as long as we're all committed to respecting the views of others and trying to earnestly, sincerely work towards a good compromise, a good future, that will be the key element. Surveys and focus groups and any other means of gathering information will be something to consider, but let's not over rely on it. That's how I feel, Kevin.
Okay, Melissa,
Yeah, I thought when we had talked about this previously, we were considering multiple ways of getting feedback or information from town. So, I mean, survey, like you said, focus groups, different meetings. It seems like the more information we have, yes, it takes time to go through it. But if we give people of the town various options on how to give us their opinions, I think we end up better off. I mean, I don't think many people are going to want to do all of the things that we offer. I mean, they'll just pick whatever is easiest or best for them or what they have time for and let us know what they think.
okay, Lloyd, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I really don't know just what they can do at this rate. If we can get a little more information or something. But seem to be enough questions on the survey stuff that I don't know if it's going to turn out useful or not.
Rob,
Yeah, well, I agree with Jeff. With when I read through the Moncton one, the open-ended questions led to a lot of unproductive information, it seemed like. So I can see where trying to formulate something to get productive feedback can be very challenging. And I know that there's a timing issue as well. So I think that that's kind of our conundrum at the moment of how we get something together to be able to use it in the right time frame. I think that we will be able to balance whatever information we get back with the caveat of how it was obtained and that it may not accurately reflect the entire town because you tend to only get a small percentage that actually participate in that sort of stuff, no matter how many avenues you offer for participation. So I think that the most challenging is just getting it rolling and getting something out to get something back.
okay, thank you. So I'm hearing maybe focus groups may be more useful, maybe a survey at some point. And then there's a matter of resources and timing. So we had, or at least I had kind of walked down a path, this would be something that this intern does with this spring semester. Does everybody feel it's a necessary thing for them to be doing, or is this something that can be worked in over this next year or whatever, when we've got a consultant on board for direction as well?
Yeah, that's where I'm heading, Kevin, that maybe trying to shoehorn this into the intern was pushing too much too fast.
Okay,
And that, yes, we want to get local input, but we just need to think about how to do it and not necessarily move it onto this intern who, whatever skills they have, it's a complex issue. Complex task. It's much more complex than updating, physical character.
okay. Any other thoughts? We just kind of keep it in mind and work on it as an independent thing from the intern.
And who knows if we could get, another intern next fall who had a skill set to do it, then we could work on it then. But I don't think we should just restrict it to the intern. We need to think more broadly about how we want to do it.
So if everybody's in closing on this item, we'll just keep it on the agenda as an open item and pursue it independent of the intern assignment then. That makes sense?
I think so.
He heads nodding.
Yeah, I think it is. I think ultimately timeline for it to be usable is probably about a year out from now, or a year plus a month or two to be able to then post-process it and be able to use it to as relevant information as we move forward with whatever proposed changes we're making or not making.
Okay, thank you. That's I think that might be the end of that discussion. Anybody disagree with that?
I think that horse is dead.
Next item is new business. I have none identified. Item after that is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I actually just had a question because I don't know who would take care of this. Is the parking on Main Street, like the signage and all of that, is that through the select board? Do
Yes,
they have to address any issues?
yeah.
Okay.
Jim, you're quiet. He's happy. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Wait, Kevin, I have a question.
Sure.
The agenda for today says the next regular planning commission meeting is February 8th, which I assume is a mistake.
That is a mistake. So the
And is
next
it Mar-
meeting is
March 1st.
March 1.
March 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, and that happens to, and thank you for reminding me, that happens to be town meeting day.
Got a possible solution for you.
As I understand it, they're gonna poll upstairs and this space is available.
So I spoke with Sharon, the town clerk.
Yeah,
They, depending on how much they have to do, they come down here and count quite often. So the fire station should be available,
okay.
and we could.
We
if you
want to
wanna
have
reach
a
out to
meeting.
Brett-
Do we want to have a meeting while town meeting is going on? It means we can't
Can't go.
attend town meeting.
Well, our meeting starts at 7 and the polls close at 7.
So the physical town meetings, the previous night, town meeting itself is
okay.
on Monday. Voting
Okay.
is till 7 that evening.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, I got it. Got it. Okay, that's fine.
So if you want, you and I can chat after on how to make that happen.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
I thought about that today. I'm like, as far as I know, the fire station is available. There's either a conference room downstairs or we have the big training room upstairs. It's available. So,
okay,
and I'll work with you on that.
okay.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, we got a motion is it on the floor? Or do I need a motion? Looks like Rob's making that motion by the smile on his face.
Yep.
Yeah, I did.
Melissa's seconding. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye, or raise your hand. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, 9:50. I took 50 minutes from you today.
It's been worse, trust me. I've sat through worse. Have a great night, all. Thank
Thanks for all
you.
that work on the RFP, Kevin. It's really, looks great.
Yeah,
Oh, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
good night.